The fourth shot hit the wagon wheel, shattering the wood and scattering fragments everywhere. Old William Barlow fell back, clutching his injured shoulder as his granddaughter Emma threw herself over him in protection. The smell of gunpowder mixed with dust on the arid plains of Wyoming, where the caravan of pioneers had become an easy target. "Hand over the gold and supplies!" one of the bandits shouted, spitting out the words as he charged forward with his horse. "No one will need to die today!" But the deaths had already begun. 2 men lay motionless on the packed earth, and a woman cried over her husband's body. The 5 wagons formed a precarious circle, offering little protection from the 8 robbers surrounding them. That was when the horizon revealed a solitary silhouette. Roy Sullivan had been riding for 2 days without adequate rest. The spotted horse, as resilient as his owner, kept his pace steady despite his exhaustion. Roy didn't plan on getting into trouble. He had enough in his previous life. His eyes, a blue faded by time and disappointment, perceived the scene less than half a mile away. Carts, gunfire, panic. Something inside him, the thing he had tried to bury for the past 5 years, instantly awakened. With a smooth movement, he drew the Winchester he carried strapped to his saddle. He did not intend to wear the revolver in its holster. That belonged to the past he had abandoned after leaving Laramie Territorial Prison. "For God's sake, someone do something!" Mary Donovan screamed, her Irish accent thicker with desperation. At 23, she had already faced famine in Ireland, a stormy ocean during the crossing to America, and now bandits in the Wild West. Her red hair escaped her makeshift bun as she helped tend to the injured. Roy Sullivan's first shot took everyone by surprise. One of the bandits fell from his horse with a thud, a red stain spreading across his chest. The second shot knocked out another. The other bandits turned around, confused, looking for the source of the shots. Roy rode his horse forward, reloading the Winchester with a skill that spoke of years of practice. "I suggest you reconsider your plans for today." His voice sounded calm, almost disinterested, as if commenting on the weather. "Who the hell are you?" The leader of the bandits, a man with a prominent scar cutting across his left cheek, aimed his gun at Roy. "Just a traveler," Roy replied, keeping the Winchester pointed. "But I can be your worst nightmare if you prefer." The tension in the air was palpable as the heat rising from the ground. Behind the apparent calm, Roy calculated distances, counted bullets, assessed opponents. 5 bandits, still standing, all armed, against a lone man. Mary's green eyes briefly met Roy's. Something inexplicable passed between them. A silent communication, an understanding. She slowly reached for the shotgun lying next to one of the injured pioneers. "You're alone, stranger," the scarred bandit growled. "There are 5 of us." "It was 8 a minute ago," Roy replied, without changing his tone. "Numbers change quickly around here." The ensuing gunfight lasted less than 20 seconds. Mary fired first, surprising the bandits by hitting one of them in the leg. Roy took advantage of the distraction, taking down 2 with impressive precision. The other 2 hesitated just long enough for Roy to step forward and disarm the leader with a well-aimed blow. The last bandit fled, raising dust on the horizon. The silence that followed was almost deafening. "Thank you," Mary was the first to speak, approaching Roy as he dismounted. "We wouldn't have survived without your help." Roy just nodded, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "I need to see the injured." Over the next few hours, Roy worked tirelessly alongside the pioneers. His hands, calloused from years of hard work and gunplay, were now stopping the blood and preparing makeshift bandages. Mary watched him with growing admiration, noticing the contradictions in this man. The lethal precision of his shots, contrasting with the kindness in caring for the wounded. "You've done this before," she commented, helping him bandage Emma Barlow's arm. "I've seen too many injuries," he replied simply. "And caused some too, I imagine." The comment made him stop for a moment. His eyes met hers, searching for judgment, but finding only a direct honesty that disarmed him more than any reproof. "Yes," he admitted, "more than I care to remember." At night, around the fire, with the wounded stabilized and the dead buried as usual, the survivors gathered to decide their next step. The Oregon Trail still stretched for hundreds of miles ahead, with unknown dangers at every turn. "We need someone who knows the way," William Barlow declared, looking directly at Roy. "Someone who knows how to defend themselves and us, too." Roy felt the weight of the eyes on him. 5 years ago, he would have refused immediately. After serving time for killing a man, even in self-defense, he swore to stay away from problems and people. His plan was to get to Montana, find work on some isolated ranch, live out his days in anonymous tranquility. "We pay well," continued Barlow, "and we need you." That's when Mary came over, sitting next to him. "Everyone deserves a second chance," she said softly, as if guessing at the demons that tormented him. "Even you, Mr. Sullivan." The words hit him like he never imagined words could. Roy stared at the flames, seeing in them reflections of his turbulent past. Then, for the first time in years, he also glimpsed the possibility of a different future. "See you, Denver," he finally said. "I can guide you to Denver." Mary smiled, her eyes reflecting fire in the same way they reflected a hope that Roy had forgotten existed. The decision was made, the destiny traced. Unbeknownst to either of them, their stories had just intertwined in ways that would change their lives forever. The rising sun painted the horizon orange and gold as the caravan prepared for another day of travel. Roy Sullivan was up before everyone else, checking damaged wagons and organizing supplies. 3 days had passed since the attack, and a routine was beginning to establish itself among the survivors. Mary discreetly watched Roy as she gathered water from the nearby stream. There was something about him that intrigued her, a gentleness hidden beneath layers of hardness, as if he carried an invisible burden. His hands, capable of firing with lethal precision, now helped a child into the cart with surprising delicacy. "He's not what he seems at first glance, is he?" Emma Barlow's voice surprised Mary. "Who?" Mary tried to hide it, but the blush on her freckled cheeks betrayed her. Emma laughed softly. "Mr. Sullivan, of course. Grandpa says men like him have stories they'd rather not tell." Mary nodded thoughtfully. "We all have stories, Emma. Some just leave more visible scars." The journey began again with the creaking of wheels and the trotting of horses. Roy rode ahead, his sharp eyes scanning the rugged terrain. He occasionally looked back, as if checking to see if Mary was still there. At noon, they stopped to rest the animals near a rocky outcrop that offered scant shade. The heat was oppressive, and the wind carried fine dust that settled on everything. "Mr. Sullivan," Mary approached, offering him a mug of coffee. "I thought you might want that." Roy accepted, his fingers briefly brushing hers. "Thanks." "Where do you come from?" she asked, sitting on the rock next to him. A silence stretched before he responded. "From many places. Lately, nowhere in particular." "And where are you going?" "Montana. I heard they need men on the cattle ranches there." Mary studied his hard profile against the blue sky. "Running away or looking for something?" The comment took Roy by surprise. His eyes met hers, and for a moment the mask fell. "Maybe both," he admitted with an honesty that surprised himself. "In Ireland," Mary began, looking at the horizon, "we say the past is like a shadow. It follows us everywhere, but it changes shape as the sun moves." Roy sipped his coffee, considering his words. "Some shadows are more persistent than others." "True, but none remain when we find enough light." Before he could respond, screams from the carts interrupted the conversation. One of the horses had been frightened by a rattlesnake, rearing violently. The animal threatened to knock a cart down the slope. Roy ran, jumping on the horse in a panic as Mary moved the children out of the way. With precise movements, he grabbed the reins, speaking in a low, firm voice until the animal calmed down. "You have a way with them," Mary commented later as they returned to the caravan. "Horses are easier to understand than people. They show clearly what they feel." "Not all people are hard to read, Mr. Sullivan." Roy looked at her, a reluctant half-smile softening his features. "Call me Roy." At night, around the fire, old William Barlow began to play a mouth organ. The melancholy melody hung over the camp like a blessing, comforting the weary travellers. One of the women began to sing, her clear voice rising in the darkness. Mary, sitting next to Roy, noticed how his fingers discreetly drummed on his leg, following the rhythm. "Do you play?" she asked. "I used to play the guitar, a long time ago." "What happened?" Roy was silent for so long that Mary thought he wouldn't respond. "I left a lot of things behind when I joined. When my life changed." "When did you become a gunslinger?" Her frankness disarmed him again. "Yes, there wasn't much room for music in that life." Later, when most of the travelers had retired, Roy stood guard, watching the stars that dotted the endless Wyoming sky. He heard soft footsteps approaching and didn't need to look to know it was Mary. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "I'm thinking about my brother," she replied, sitting next to him. "Patrick left for the West 5 years ago. Said he'd make a fortune and send for us, Mom and me. The letters got rarer, then stopped altogether." Roy felt an inexplicable tightness in his chest. "A lot of things can happen in the West. That's why I came looking for you. Mom passed away last year, and I have no one left in Ireland." She looked at Roy. "The last letter came from a place called Sweetwater." The name hit Roy like a physical blow, but he kept his expression neutral. Sweetwater, the place where everything had changed for him, where he had killed a man named Patrick in a saloon dispute that had gotten out of control. "It's a dangerous place," was all he could say. "All places are dangerous for those alone," Mary replied, her gaze meeting his in the dim light lit by the dying fire. Roy felt something awaken inside him, an almost forgotten emotion, a longing he had buried along with his guitar and his hopes for a normal life. Fate had a wicked sense of humor, he thought. Of all the caravans in danger, he had to find this one. Of all the women in the world, he had to be attracted to her. "We are never truly alone by choice, Mary," he said finally. "Sometimes it's the only way to protect others from who we are." "Or who we think we are," she replied softly, standing up. "Good evening, Roy Sullivan." As he watched her return to her wagon, Roy realized he was at a crossroads more dangerous than any armed confrontation he had ever faced. Past and present converged like storm clouds on the horizon, and at the center was Mary, a woman who, unknowingly, was searching for the man he had killed. The following days on the trail brought a steady rhythm of journey and rest, with the group moving steadily westward. The caravan had come together after the attack, with each survivor finding their role. To Roy's surprise, he found himself naturally taking the lead, something he had avoided for years. One particularly hot afternoon, when a young boy lost control of his wagon while crossing a stream, it was Roy who dove into the water, saving him before the current carried him away. On another occasion, he taught 2 teenagers how to track animals, showing them how to identify fresh rabbit tracks that later served as dinner for everyone. Mary watched these subtle transformations in Roy with growing admiration. As he helped one of the women in the caravan prepare medicines from local herbs, she frequently looked up to follow his movements around the camp. "He looks different every day," commented Emma, who had become Mary's inseparable friend. "Less tense." "People change when they find their place." Mary replied, crushing wild sage leaves in a small pestle. Or when they meet someone, Emma smiled, earning a stern but blushing look from Mary. On the 7th night of the journey, a storm thundered over the plains. The wagons were grouped together in a tight formation to protect the animals, while everyone took shelter as best they could. Mary found Roy working to reinforce one of the wind-torn tarps. "Do you need help?" she asked, holding a hammer and nails. Roy smiled. That smile was still rare, and Mary treasured it every time it appeared. "Hold it here," he indicated, positioning the tarp taut. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, interrupted only by distant thunder. When they finished, Roy hesitated, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. "What it was?" Mary asked, moving a little closer. "I've been thinking about your brother," he said finally. "Sweetwater is no place for a woman alone. I won't be alone if I find him." Roy looked away. What if you don't find him?" The rain intensified, drumming on the canvas above them. Mary lightly touched Roy's arm. "Then I will find my own way. I always have." "I could," Roy began hesitantly. "When we get to Denver, I could help you look for him." Mary's heart quickened. "I thought you were going to Montana." "Some fates can wait," he replied simply. That night, sheltered from the storm, William Barlow persuaded Roy to tell stories about his travels. Reluctant at first, Roy eventually gave in, describing majestic mountains, nascent cities, and peculiar characters he had met. "And what brought you to Wyoming?" asked one of the pioneers. The question hung in the air like smoke. Roy felt Mary's gaze on him. "I've been fulfilling a debt," he replied vaguely. "Some mistakes need to be paid for." Later, when almost everyone was asleep, Mary found Roy still awake, watching the rain that was now falling gently. "It was prison, wasn't it?" she asked directly. "What you call debt?" Roy looked at her in surprise, then nodded slowly. 5 years in Laramie, for killing a man." Mary didn't back down as he expected. "In self-defense?" The jury didn't think so initially, but the judge was compassionate, considering the circumstances. "What circumstances?" Roy sighed deeply. "He was drunk, teasing a girl in the saloon. When I intervened, he drew first." "So you killed him to save an innocent life," Mary concluded simply. "I don't see any crime in that." "The law has its own ideas about justice," Roy replied, touched by the simplicity with which she viewed the situation. Mary sat next to him. "In Ireland, I knew men who killed for much less, and others who died for much less too." A comfortable silence settled between them, filled only by the sound of rain. Without thinking, Roy covered her hand with his own. For a moment, they both just stared at their joined hands, feeling their shared warmth, in contrast to the cold night air. "You are an extraordinary woman, Mary Donovan," Roy said softly. "And you're not the stone-cold gunslinger you try to appear to be, Roy Sullivan," she replied, turning her hand to intertwine her fingers with his. The next morning, the air was clear after the storm, and a faint glow seemed to envelop the caravan. William Barlow noted with interest how Roy and Mary worked together, preparing for the match, their movements synchronized as if dancing a silent dance. "Love blooms in the unlikeliest of places," he muttered to himself, adjusting his hat. Less than 2 days out of Denver, the landscape began to change, with the first signs of mountains appearing on the horizon. Roy was riding alongside Mary's wagon now, no longer in the lone front as before. "We're almost there," he commented, looking at the distant mountains. "And then?" Mary asked, her green eyes fixed on him, not on the horizon. The question hovered between them, loaded with unspoken possibilities. Roy knew the truth about Patrick O'Connor waited for them somewhere ahead. Guilt and secrecy weighed in his chest like lead. But Mary's eyes held something he thought he had lost forever. Hope. "Later," he said finally, "we'll find out together." The plains of Wyoming seemed to stretch endlessly beneath the cerulean sky. The caravan advanced at a steady pace, with the smoke from the morning fires leaving faint trails in the clear air. It was the 10th day of the trip, and the routine had established itself among the travelers. Roy Sullivan was no longer the lonely outsider, but an integral part of the group, respected and, to his own surprise, accepted. "We will stop at noon," Roy announced, returning from his usual morning ride at the head of the party. "There's a stream less than 2 miles away. The animals need to rest." Mary smiled as she saw him approach his wagon. Over the past few weeks, something had blossomed between them, still unspoken, but palpable, like the tension before a summer storm. "Did you find any signs of trouble?" she asked, adjusting the scarf that protected her red hair from the relentless sun. "Nothing but some buffalo tracks, very old." Roy dismounted, walking alongside the wagon. "We'll be in Denver in less than a week if we keep up this pace." A heavy silence fell between them. Denver meant decisions, stick together or separate. For Mary, it meant resuming the search for her brother Patrick. For Roy, it meant the moment of truth he feared so much. "What will you do when we arrive?" Mary asked finally, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Roy hesitated, measuring his words. "I promised I would help you find your brother." "And then?" Before Roy could respond, William Barlow approached, interrupting the conversation. "Sullivan, I need your opinion about the axle of this wagon. It's been making a strange noise since yesterday." Roy nodded, giving Mary one last look before walking away. Unspoken words weighed more than spoken ones. At noon, the caravan stopped near the promised stream, a trickle of crystal-clear water meandering between mossy rocks. The children immediately ran into the water, laughing and splashing each other, while the adults unharnessed the animals. Mary was organizing supplies when Emma Barlow approached, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. "To decorate your wagon," offered the girl, smiling. "Perhaps also to impress a certain blue-eyed gentleman." Mary laughed, blushing slightly. "Emma Barlow, you have a very vivid imagination." "And very good eyes," replied the girl, blinking conspiratorially. "My grandfather says he's never seen Roy Sullivan smile as much as he has these last few weeks." In the afternoon, while most people were resting, Roy left the camp, looking for a moment of solitude. He found a small promontory from where he could observe the vast panorama of the plains. He sat down on a rock, taking an aged silver medallion from his pocket. "Thinking about leaving?" Mary's voice surprised him. Roy closed the locket quickly, but not enough to hide the small, faded photograph inside. "No," he replied. "Just remembering." Mary sat beside him, the wind playing with loose strands of her hair. "Family?" "My youngest sister, Sarah. She passed away 8 years ago, from a fever." "I'm sorry," Mary said softly, touching his arm in comfort. Roy took a deep breath. "After our parents died, I promised to take care of her. I failed." "Death isn't a failure, Roy. It's part of life. Not when you could have prevented it." His eyes met hers, revealing an old pain. "It was after I lost it that I started carrying the pistol, as if I could control destiny if I were armed." Mary didn't respond immediately, letting the silence speak for itself. After a few moments, she simply reached out, intertwining her fingers with his. They stayed like that, contemplating the horizon, until the sun began to set, dyeing the sky red and gold. When they finally returned to camp, something had changed between them. An invisible barrier had fallen. That night, after dinner, William Barlow picked up his old guitar, playing tunes that everyone knew. To everyone's surprise, Roy asked to borrow the instrument. I haven't played in years, he warned, adjusting the strings with fingers that seemed to remember the path. The first chords came out hesitantly, but soon a gentle melody flowed, filling the night air. Roy began to sing in a deep, melancholy voice, an old Tennessee ballad about love lost and redemption found. Mary watched, fascinated. This man who killed with precision and healed with kindness now revealed another facet, the soul of a poet hidden beneath the hardened appearance. When he finished, a reverent silence fell over the group before applause began. Roy handed the guitar back, his face more relaxed than anyone had ever seen it. Later, when the others had retired, Mary found Roy sitting by the fire in agony. "You never failed to amaze me," she said, sitting down next to him. Roy smiled, the reflection of embers dancing in his eyes. "There are many things I left behind, Mary. The guitar was just one of them. And what else? Hope. The ability to look into the future without seeing only shadows." Mary took courage and touched his face, gently turning him to face her. "And now? What do you see?" Roy's eyes raked over her features, the intense green eyes, the soft freckles, the parted lips. "I see possibilities that I thought were dead to me." When their lips met, it was as if time stopped. A hesitant kiss at first, then deep, like the waters of a wild river. When they separated, they both knew there was no going back. "There are things about me you need to know," Roy began, his voice shaky. "There will be time for that," Mary replied, placing a finger on her lips. "Tonight, just stay with me." Under the starry Wyoming sky, two lonely souls found in each other what they had searched for so long, a sense of belonging, the promise of a tomorrow. But the secrets of the past, like shadows at dusk, only grew as the light approached. The dawn light revealed Denver on the distant horizon, a promise of civilization after weeks on the trail. Roy adjusted his horse's reins, his heart heavy with the secret he carried. 3 days had passed since that kiss under the stars, 3 days of exchanged glances and furtive touches, moments stolen when the other travelers slept. "So that's where I'll find answers about Patrick," Mary commented, pulling her wagon to him at the highest point of the hill. Roy swallowed. "Mary, before we arrive, I need to tell you something." Her green eyes looked up at him expectantly. What could be so serious? Before he could respond, screams echoed from the rear of the caravan. A wheel had broken on the Lindeman's wagon, scattering supplies across the dusty path. The moment of confession would have to wait. "Nothing that can't wait," Roy muttered, turning his horse. "I will help the Lindemans. Keep moving forward." In the afternoon they camped for the last time before Denver. The mood was celebratory. They had survived the perilous journey, thanks in large part to Roy's leadership. Old Barlow raised a toast with his nearly empty whiskey bottle. "To Roy Sullivan, the man who has saved us more times than I can count." As the others applauded, Roy walked away, uncomfortable with the attention. Mary followed him to the edge of the stream where the horses were drinking. "You should accept gratitude more easily," she smiled, leaning on his shoulder. "I'm not sure I deserve it," he replied, staring at the flowing water. "Especially yours." Mary frowned. "Why especially mine?" Roy took a deep breath, knowing he couldn't delay it any longer. "Mary, when I said I killed a man in self-defense, I didn't tell you everything." "What part did you leave out?" "His name." Roy's voice trailed off for a moment. "It was Patrick O'Connor." The silence that followed seemed to last an eternity. Mary took a step back, eyes wide, her hand instinctively covering her mouth. That's not possible," she whispered finally. "My brother was Patrick Donovan." It was Roy's turn to look confused. "But you said..." Donovan is my last name. In America, Patrick started using our mother's last name, O'Connor. He said it sounded more respectable for business. Roy felt the world spin around him. So it was. It really was your brother. Tears began to well up in Mary's eyes, not from sadness, but from a growing fury. All this time, did you know who I was looking for? Not right away, Roy tried to explain, only when you mentioned Sweetwater. And then your last name was different. It doesn't matter. You let me talk about him, about my hopes of finding him, knowing all the time that I had killed him. Her voice attracted curious looks from the other travelers. Mary turned her back and walked quickly to her wagon, with Roy following her. Mary, please. He was drunk. He threatened an innocent girl. When I intervened, he drew first. That doesn't justify your lie. She turned around, her face red with anger. You kissed me. You let me fall in love, knowing that our destinies were linked by my brother's blood. The words hit Roy harder than any bullet ever fired at him. I was going to tell you. I tried several times. But he never found enough courage, she added bitterly. A gunslinger afraid of words. How ironic. Roy remained motionless as she gathered some belongings into her wagon. What are you going to do? I'll head to Denver at dawn. Alone. Mary, the roads are still dangerous. Let me at least— No, she interrupted, eyes sparkling. I don't want your protection. I don't want anything from you. That night, Roy kept his distance, sitting alone at the edge of the camp. Emma Barlow approached cautiously. What happened between you and Miss Donovan? Asked the girl with the frankness typical of youth. Roy smiled sadly. I discovered that some mistakes can't be fixed no matter how much time passes. My grandfather says there is no mistake that true love cannot forgive. Your grandfather is a wise man, Emma, Roy replied, but he doesn't know my past. At dawn, Roy found Mary's place empty. She had left before sunrise, leaving only a note pinned to her abandoned wagon. Do not follow me. William Barlow placed a sympathetic hand on Roy's shoulder. Irish women have tempers. Give it a break. Time can't erase what I did, Roy murmured. Still, as the caravan resumed its final journey toward Denver, Roy kept his eyes fixed on the dust of the road, looking for signs of Mary's recent passage. The city loomed in the distance, with its wooden buildings and the promise of civilization. For other travelers, Denver represented the end of an arduous journey. For Roy Sullivan, it was just the beginning of an even more difficult path, the path to redemption, if there was one left for him. As he rode, Winchester in his saddle and heart heavy in his chest, Roy knew there was only one possible choice: move forward and face the consequences of his past, even if it meant losing Mary forever. The dusty streets of Denver welcomed Roy Sullivan with the same indifference as the plains of Wyoming. The city was buzzing with miners, traders, and outsiders seeking their fortune, none of them interested in the dark-eyed man who roamed the streets with silent determination. 3 days had passed since the caravan arrived, and 3 days he had been looking for Mary. You won't find her if she doesn't want to be found, declared William Barlow, sitting next to Roy at the counter of the Golden Eagle Saloon. Irish women are as stubborn as desert mules. Roy swirled the glass of whiskey without drinking. I need to at least know you're safe. And then? What do you mean to say that will change the fact that you killed her brother? The question hung in the air, heavy as lead. Roy had no answer. He had rehearsed explanations, pleas for forgiveness, even the full story about Patrick O'Connor and his violence that night in Sweetwater. But words seemed so insignificant in the face of the magnitude of his betrayal. Maybe some paths weren't meant to cross for a long time, Roy muttered, finally taking a sip. Nonsense. Barlow slammed the table with surprising force for a man his age. Every path can change direction. The question is whether you are willing to build a new trail. When Roy left the saloon, the sun was beginning to set, bathing the streets of Denver in golden light. In the distant mountains, dark clouds announced a storm. With no defined destination, he walked through the main streets, observing each face, looking for a familiar glow of red hair. It was then that he saw, not Mary, but a poster nailed to the wall of the police station. Help wanted for caravan. Departure for Santa Fe in 3 days. Look for Mr. Donaldson at the Continental Hotel. As good a fate as any, Roy thought. Away from Denver, away from the memories, maybe I could start over again. He turned to head towards the hotel when a familiar voice froze him in place. Your testimony will be sufficient, Miss Donovan. Will you confirm then that this man, Patrick O'Connor, was your brother? Roy turned slowly. In front of the police station door, Mary was talking to the sheriff, a tall man with a grey moustache. She looked tired, thinner, but her bearing remained proud. Yes, Sheriff Hutchinson. I came from Ireland looking for him. I just want to know exactly what happened. Her voice shook slightly on the last sentence. Roy retreated into the shadows. This was no time to confront her, not when she was still seeking official answers. He wouldn't be able to escape, however, before the sheriff spotted him. Sullivan, is that really you? Hutchinson called, waving. Come in here. We were just talking about the O'Connor case. For a fleeting moment, Roy and Mary's eyes met. In her eyes there was no longer anger, only a deep sadness that hit him like a physical blow. Sheriff, Roy greeted, slowly approaching. Miss Donovan, do you know each other? The sheriff asked, looking from one to the other. We travel in the same caravan, Mary replied, her voice controlled as if speaking to a stranger. I didn't know who he was until recently. The sheriff's office smelled of old leather and strong coffee. Hutchinson rummaged through a drawer, pulling out a dusty file. Interesting coincidence, he commented, opening the folder. Sullivan, would you mind telling the lady what happened that night? The records are too dry. Roy glanced at Mary, who was staring at the floorboards. If she wants to hear it, he replied. Mary nodded almost imperceptibly. Roy took a deep breath, reliving that night that changed his life. I worked security at the Silver Dollar Saloon in Sweetwater. Patrick was drinking heavily, bothering one of the waitresses, the owner's daughter. When I asked him to stop, he became violent. The girl was just a teenager, the sheriff added. 16 years. I tried to calm him down, Roy continued, but he pulled out his gun, threatening everyone. He shot first, narrowly missing the bartender's head. Mary closed her eyes as if every word hurt her. I had no choice. I shot once. Roy paused. I didn't aim to kill, but I hit an artery. He bled before the doctor arrived. The silence that followed felt thick enough to cut with a knife. The sheriff leafed through some documents. The jury initially found manslaughter, but the judge revised it to self-defense after testimony. Sullivan served reduced time and was released a few months ago. Mary finally looked up. Is this how he was living? Threatening innocent young people? Unfortunately, miss, your brother had a difficult reputation in Sweetwater, replied Hutchinson gently. Several complaints, 2 arrests for drunk and disorderly. A lone tear ran down Mary's freckled face. He was different when he left Ireland. America changed him. Or maybe it just brought out what was already there. Roy resisted the urge to comfort her. Thank you, Sheriff, Mary said, standing up. I have what I came for. He left quickly without looking at Roy. He remained motionless, torn between following her and respecting her space. Go after her, man, the sheriff muttered. It's obvious there's more between you two than just a shared trip. Roy found Mary sitting on a bench in the small central square, looking at the mountains. He approached cautiously. Can I sit down? Mary nodded silently. For long moments, they just watched the horizon together. "I should have told you sooner," Roy finally said. "Yes, it should." She wiped away a tear. "But I understand why you didn't tell me." Roy looked at her, surprised. "I didn't say I forgave him," Mary added. "Just that I understand." "What will you do now?" he asked. Mary took a deep breath. "I'll head to Santa Fe. I heard they need teachers there." The words on the poster echoed in Roy's mind. Coincidence or destiny? The name didn't matter. It was a second chance. "Mary, don't say anything yet," she interrupted. "I need time, Roy. Time to understand how I feel, to forgive, if that's possible." Roy nodded, respecting his decision. "I'll be around if you need me." The storm finally reached the mountains, distant thunder heralding changes in the air. Like their lives, the sky was divided, half bathed in the last gold of the setting sun, half covered in dark storm clouds. Between them, invisible but palpable, a fragile bridge began to form over the abyss dug by death and omission. Mary disappeared off the streets of Denver for 3 days, while Roy searched tirelessly for her. Sheriff Hutchinson had confirmed his version of Patrick's death, but that did little to console the former gunman. The truth, however justifiable it was, didn't change the fact that he had taken the life of the brother of the woman he loved. On the morning of the 4th day, Roy found Mary in the small chapel on the outskirts of town. She was kneeling on one of the benches, the sun's rays passing through the colorful stained glass windows and painting her silhouette. He hesitated at the door, unsure whether he should interrupt his moment of prayer. "Come in, Roy," she said without turning around. "I knew you would find me eventually." He walked down the center aisle, the sound of his boots echoing in the sacred silence. He sat on the bench behind her, keeping a respectful distance. "I've been praying every day," Mary continued, still with her back to him. "For the parents I lost, for the brother who was lost before he even died, and for both of us." "For us?" Roy asked, surprised. Mary finally turned around, her green eyes teary but serene. "I've spent the last few days talking to people in Sweetwater. I've had letters sent to me. They all tell the same story about Patrick." Roy waited in silence while she took a small bundle of yellowed letters from her pocket. "My brother was not the man I imagined all these years," she said, her voice breaking. "The letters he sent were lies. He never had any promising business. He spent it all on drinking and gambling. The last person to write was a girl called Eleanor Jenkins, the girl you defended that night." "Mary, I'm so sorry. I wish it were different." "Me too." She stood up, coming over to sit next to him. "But the truth is rarely as we wish. Patrick died by his own choices, not yours." The silence that followed had the weight of a prayer and the lightness of forgiveness. Outside, the city's activity continued indifferently, creaking carts, merchants advertising their wares, children running in the dusty streets. Inside the chapel, however, time seemed suspended. "Do you believe in second chances, Roy Sullivan?" Mary asked finally. Roy looked at his calloused hands, marked from years of wielding weapons. "I want to believe, but some mistakes seem too big to let go of. I'm not just talking about forgiving the past. I'm talking about building something new." She covered his hand with hers. "I still plan on going to Santa Fe." Roy's heart sped up. "The Donaldson caravan leaves in 2 days. I know. I've already signed up as a teacher for the children." Mary smiled slightly. It would be nice to have someone with experience to protect the entourage. The proposal hovered between them like an unspoken promise. Roy knew it offered more than just a shared trip. It offered a path to redemption, for both of them. "Mary, I'm not the man you deserve," he said finally. "Maybe it's not up to me to decide what I deserve, but what I choose." His green eyes shone with determination. "And I choose to give what I feel for you a chance, despite everything." As they left the chapel, the midday sun bathed Denver in golden light. The city was buzzing with dreams and ambitions, people chasing fortunes or new beginnings. Mary and Roy walked side by side, not holding hands, but close enough to feel each other's warmth. "I need to notify William Barlow of my departure," Roy commented as they passed through the central square. "He already knows," Mary replied with a small smile. "In fact, he was the one who suggested I see Mr. Donaldson." "That old fox." Roy shook his head, surprised by the old man's machinations. Over the next 2 days, they both prepared for the journey. Roy sold his spotted horse and bought a sturdier one suitable for the arid trails to Santa Fe. Mary acquired books and teaching materials, determined to fulfill her role in the new community. On the morning of departure, the Donaldson caravan, 5 wagons and 12 people, assembled on the edge of Denver. The sky was clear, with some clouds on the horizon, promising a pleasant day for the start of the trip. William Barlow and his granddaughter Emma turned up to say goodbye. The girl hugged Mary tightly and whispered something in her ear that made her blush and laugh at the same time. "What did she say?" Roy asked later. "That we should give our children Irish names," Mary replied, watching his reaction. Roy gasped, but didn't deny the possibility. Old Barlow shook his hand firmly. "This is your real second chance, Sullivan. Don't waste it." "I don't intend to, sir." As the caravan left Denver, Mary sat next to Roy in the main wagon. The road to Santa Fe would be long and dangerous, crossing disputed territories and unforgiving landscapes. But for the first time in years, Roy Sullivan saw beyond the horizon. "Do you know what else Eleanor Jenkins wrote?" Mary broke the silence after an hour of travel. "What?" "That on the night you faced Patrick, she saw in your eyes that you didn't want to kill, that even though you were drawing in self-defense, you tried to shoot, to incapacitate, not to kill." Roy looked at the horizon, remembering that moment that changed his life. "I never wanted to be a murderer." "And it isn't," Mary replied softly. "He's a man seeking redemption. And maybe I'm part of that path, just as you are part of mine." The sun was rising in the Wyoming sky, illuminating the road ahead, not just the dusty trail to Santa Fe, but the uncertain and hopeful path they had chosen to walk together. The road to Santa Fe wound through open plains and rugged terrain, with reddish dust rising behind the Donaldson caravan like a curtain. 2 weeks had passed since they left Denver, and the group had already developed a comfortable routine. Roy had naturally taken on the role of security leader, while Mary organized daily lessons for the 3 children in the caravan. On a particularly hot afternoon, Roy watched Mary conducting her class under the shade of a lone oak tree during their rest stop. With a storybook on her lap, she gestured excitedly, captivating the children's attention with tales of distant lands. There was something magical in the way her melodious voice, with that slight Irish accent, transformed simple words into extraordinary adventures. "Admiring the view?" The voice of Daniel Donaldson, the caravan leader, surprised Roy. "Just checking to make sure everything's okay," Roy replied, looking away. The older man smiled. "I know a man in love when I see one. And I also know a man carrying a burden." Roy sighed. "Things between us are complicated." "Life is complicated, Sullivan. The West is complicated. That doesn't mean we should run away from what matters." As they prepared camp for the night, dark clouds began to form on the horizon. Roy consulted the sky with concern. "Storm coming," he muttered to Mary as she organized supplies. "Strong by the looks of it." Mary studied his tense face. "You seem more worried than a simple rain would justify." "We're in Comanche territory," Roy explained, keeping his voice low so as not to alarm the others. "Generally, they respect the trade trails, But lately there have been attacks. If the storm delays us, should we warn the others? I don't want to cause unnecessary panic. I'll talk to Donaldson. We'll double our guard tonight. As the sun set, the first bolt of electricity cut through the sky, followed by the rumble of thunder. The children huddled in the wagons as the rain began to fall, first in scattered drops, then in thick sheets that turned the ground to mud. Mary found Roy standing guard under a makeshift shield, his profile silhouetted by the occasional flash of lightning. "It shouldn't be out here," he commented as she approached, sharing his blanket. "I can't sleep with this thunder," she replied, settling in beside him. "Besides, I prefer your company to solitude." The silence between them had the familiarity of someone who shared a lot in a short time. "Have you ever regretted it?" Roy finally asked. "For allowing me to come along?" Mary considered the question for a moment. "Almost every morning when I wake up and remember who you are. And then every night when I see how you care for all of us, I change my mind again. I don't know if I can live with that." "With what?" "With the idea that every time you look at me, even for a moment, you see the man who killed your brother." Mary turned to face him, her face partially lit by the distant lightning. "When I look at you, Roy Sullivan, I see many things. I see the man who saved a caravan of pioneers. I see the man who taught Emma Barlow to whistle like a bird. I see the man who can play the guitar and tends wounds with the same kindness that protects strangers." Her hands found his in the darkness. "And yes, sometimes I see the man connected to Patrick's death. But that is becoming just a part of who you are to me, not the entirety." When the first rays of sunlight dispersed the storm clouds, the caravan awoke to find the world washed clean and renewed. The mud would make the journey slower, but the clean air and clear sky lifted spirits. It was Maria Jimenez, one of the women in the caravan, who noticed it first. "Tracks!" She pointed to the damp ground to the east. "Lots of horses." Roy examined the marks with a serious expression. "Recent, from after the rain." "Comanches?" Donaldson asked, approaching with his shotgun. "Possible. 6, maybe 7 nights." Roy stood up, scanning the horizon. "They're observing, evaluating." Tension coursed through the camp as everyone hurried to prepare to leave. Mary instructed the children to stay in the central carts, organizing books and materials to keep them distracted. "If anything happens," Roy murmured as he passed her, "stay with the kids. Don't try anything heroic." Their eyes met for a moment, filled with unspoken words. Mary nodded, briefly touching his arm, a simple gesture that communicated more than any statement. The caravan advanced cautiously, with the men strategically positioned between the carts. Roy rode ahead, his eyes constantly scanning the rugged terrain and rock formations that dotted the plain. The morning passed without incident, but the feeling of being watched persisted. At noon, when they stopped briefly to let the animals drink from a small stream, Mary approached Roy. "It's very quiet," she observed. "No birds singing." Roy nodded gravely. "They're close by." As if his words had conjured the threat, a war cry echoed from the nearby hills. 7 Comanche warriors galloped into view, bows drawn and spears raised. "To the wagons!" Roy shouted, pulling out his Winchester. Chaos ensued within seconds. Mary ran to gather the terrified children, sheltering them under one of the carts, while the men formed a defensive line. The first warrior fell with a well-aimed shot from Donaldson, but the others advanced mercilessly. Roy aimed with calculated precision, bringing down horses rather than men when possible. "We don't want a blood war," he muttered to himself as he reloaded. "Just let us pass." Under the wagon, Mary hugged the trembling children, whispering words of comfort. Their eyes, however, wouldn't leave Roy, his determined figure against the blue sky, risking his life to protect them. It was at that moment, in the midst of chaos and danger, that she finally understood the truth that her heart already knew. Despite everything that separated them, her destiny was inexorably intertwined with his. The night after the Comanche attack brought a heavy silence to the camp. 3 men in the caravan had been injured, one of them seriously. Mary took turns caring for the traumatized children and helping to dress the injured. Roy, for his part, kept watch at the edges of the camp, his eyes never resting as he scanned the dark horizon. "They won't be back tonight," said Donaldson, approaching with a cup of coffee. "They've lost 2 men. They'll need to regroup and assess whether we're worth the effort." Roy accepted the coffee, but his expression remained grim. "We can't be sure. Comanches are unpredictable, especially when blood has been spilled. You seem to know the natives well." "I spent a winter with the Cheyenne years ago." Roy sipped his coffee. "I learned that they are people, not demons as many people think. They have families, traditions, codes of honor, and limits that, when crossed, generate consequences." A groan came from the wagon transformed into a makeshift infirmary. Young Jeffrey Turner, shot in the shoulder by an arrow, was battling a fever. Mary got out of the wagon, her face pale with exhaustion. "How is he?" Roy asked. "The fever doesn't break." Mary ran her hands over her face. "I'm afraid the arrowhead was poisoned." Roy handed Donaldson the cup and stood up. "I know some herbs that might help. In my time with the Cheyenne, I learned their remedies." Under the starry sky, Roy and Mary walked around the camp, looking for the necessary plants. The silvery moonlight illuminated the rocky terrain, creating elongated shadows and giving the desert a ghostly beauty. "You never mentioned that you lived with the natives," Mary commented, collecting the herbs that Roy identified. "There are many things I haven't mentioned." He hesitated before continuing. "After losing my sister, I wandered aimlessly until a blizzard caught me off guard. I was found by Cheyenne hunters, more dead than alive. They could have let me die, but they took me to their camp." Mary watched him carefully, noticing how the nightlight softened his hard features. "What made you leave them?" "Miners found gold in lands sacred to them. When the conflict began, I realized I would be forced to choose a side." His voice dropped. "I couldn't choose, so I left before I had to." "Always running away from difficult choices," she observed with no accusation in her voice. Roy smiled sadly. "Until recently, yes." Back at camp, they applied the improvised medicine to Jeffrey. The following hours were silent vigil, with Mary and Roy side by side, monitoring the injured young man's breathing. When dawn arrived, the fever finally broke. "You saved his life," Mary whispered, relief evident in her voice. "We saved it," Roy corrected softly. The look they exchanged contained much more than gratitude. Mary felt her heart quicken when Roy hesitantly touched her face with his fingertips, gently outlining her cheek. "Mary, Mr. Sullivan!" The urgent voice of one of the sentries interrupted the moment. "Knight's approaching from the south!" Roy stood up immediately, followed by Mary. The tension returned to their bodies as they moved towards the edge of the camp. On the horizon, 5 silhouettes approached. Roy narrowed his eyes, trying to distinguish whether they were returning Comanches or some other threat. "White people," he finally concluded. "White knights." As they approached, it became clear that they were not simply travelers. His horses were of quality, his clothes suggested money, and the man in front rode with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. "Samuel Lancaster," muttered Donaldson from Roy's side. "The cattle baron from Santa Fe. What would he be doing so far from his property?" The knights stopped at a respectful distance. The man in front, tall and of imperial bearing despite his 60 years, took off his hat in salute. "Good morning, travelers. Samuel Lancaster at your service." His voice was deep and cultivated, contrasting with the rusticity of the environment. We saw signs of a struggle. Is everyone okay? We had an unpleasant encounter with Comanches, Donaldson replied. Nothing we couldn't handle. Lancaster dismounted with the agility of a younger man. We are patrolling the region. Attacks have increased in recent weeks. His searching gaze scanned the group, lingering on Mary. I see you have a lady among you. My wife will be delighted to welcome you to our farm, which is only half a day away. Roy noticed the sudden change in Lancaster's interest and instinctively positioned himself closer to Mary. We are grateful for the offer, Donaldson replied diplomatically, but our route to Santa Fe is direct. I insist, Lancaster smiled, though his eyes remained cold. In these dangerous times, a safe respite is valuable. Besides, I have business in Santa Fe in 3 days. You can follow me under my wing. A tense silence fell over the group. The offer was hard to refuse, especially with an injured Jeffrey needing proper care. Roy exchanged a look with Mary, noticing her wary expression. There was something about Lancaster that aroused distrust in both of them. We will accept your hospitality, Mr. Lancaster, Donaldson finally decided. We will leave at dawn. As Lancaster and his men settled into camp, Roy pulled Mary aside. I don't trust him, he whispered. Neither do I, she agreed. There's something in his eyes, like he's evaluating goods, not people. Roy nodded grimly. Stay close to me during the visit. Lancaster may be powerful in Santa Fe, but that doesn't mean he's honorable. What should have been a relief, the offer of safety and comfort, had brought new tension to the group. As the sun rose over the horizon, Mary met Roy's gaze once again, a silent communication passing between them. Whatever danger Samuel Lancaster posed, they would face it together. The Lancaster Ranch stood imposingly against the New Mexico sky, its 2-story main house dominating the landscape. After a week staying at the property, the tension between Roy and Samuel Lancaster was palpable like electricity before a storm. He's watching you, Roy murmured to Mary as they walked through the mansion's garden. The same way a wolf watches a sheep. Mary tightened the shawl around her shoulders. Victoria Lancaster told me that he lost his daughter 2 years ago. I think he sees something in her that reminds him of the girl. It's not just that. Roy glanced at the office window, where Lancaster was watching them. There is something calculating in your interest. The party was supposed to leave for Santa Fe 3 days earlier, but Lancaster had invented excuses after excuse. Dangerous roads, reports of Comanche attacks, postponed business. Donaldson, impressed by his host's wealth and influence, accepted the justifications without question. That night, during the elaborate dinner, Lancaster raised his crystal glass. A toast to Miss Donovan, whose grace and politeness have brightened our home this week. Mary smiled politely, uncomfortable with the attention. Under the table, Roy discreetly touched his hand. Actually, Lancaster continued, I would like to make an announcement. After speaking with Mr. Donaldson, we have decided that Miss Donovan will be staying with us permanently as guardian of my nephews who arrive next month. A stunned silence took over the room. Mary turned pale. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding, she replied firmly. I have a teaching appointment in Santa Fe. Lancaster smiled indulgently. A commitment to whom, exactly? My influence in Santa Fe is considerable. The position I offer is far superior. Miss Donovan will make her own decision, Roy interjected, his voice calm but charged with menace. And who are you to interfere, Sullivan? Lancaster retorted, abandoning cordiality. A regenerated gunslinger, from what I hear. A man with blood on his hands. Roy remained impassive. We all have blood on our hands in the West, Mr. Lancaster. The difference is in how we handle it. Later, in the room assigned to her, Mary heard soft knocks on the door. It was Roy, his face tense in the dim lamplight. "We need to leave tonight," he whispered. "Lancaster is not who he appears to be." "What did you find?" "I overheard a conversation between him and the foreman. Lancaster didn't lose a daughter. He sold her in marriage to a Mexican baron, and he intends to do the same to you." Mary covered her mouth, horrified. "Why?" "Gambling debts. Need money fast to save your properties." Roy held his hands. "Be ready in an hour. I'll bring the horses to the back of the house." At midnight, under a starry sky, Mary and Roy rode at speed across the rough terrain. The alarm at the Lancaster farm sounded shortly after they escaped, and soon they heard horses' hooves in the distance. "They're following us," Mary gasped, clinging to the horse's mane. Roy checked his Winchester. "I know a shortcut. If we reach the pass before dawn, we'll have a chance." They rode through the night, their bodies aching and minds alert. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, they saw the gorge and 5 Lancaster knights blocking the way. "End a line, Sullivan!" shouted the foreman, pointing a shotgun. "Hand over the girl, and we will spare her life." Roy slowly dismounted, positioning himself between Mary and the men. "Mary," he said without looking back, "when I say, ride into the gorge, don't stop." "Not without you," she replied, her green eyes shining with determination. "Promise," he insisted. The moment stretched out like a rope stretched to its maximum. The foreman took a step forward, confident in his numerical superiority. "Now!" Roy shouted, drawing his gun with impressive speed. The first 2 shots knocked 2 men down before they could react. The third frightened the pursuers' horses. In the confusion, Mary hesitated only a second before shooing her horse toward the gorge. The exchange of fire was brief and savage. When the dust settled, 2 Lancaster men were dead, another was wounded, and the rest had fled. Roy, with a wound on his arm, mounted his horse and set off on Mary's trail. He found her waiting on the other side of the gorge, her face a mix of relief and determination to see him arrive. "You promised to follow," he said, dismounting with difficulty. Mary tore off a piece of her petticoat to bandage her injured arm. "And you should know that the Irish are not known for keeping foolish promises." As Mary tended to the wound, their eyes met. There, in the middle of the desert, persecuted and exhausted, they finally found the clarity they had sought since that first encounter in the pioneer caravan. "Patrick would have liked you," Mary said softly, "of the man you became, not the one he knew." Roy touched his face with his free hand. "Is that enough for you? One man trying to be better than he was?" "It's more than enough," she replied. "It's all anyone can hope for in this world." 3 days later, they arrived in Santa Fe. The Spanish city, with its adobe buildings and winding alleys, seemed a world apart from the wild plains. Donaldson and the rest of the caravan received them with amazement and joy, having arrived 2 days earlier. In the small chapel on the central square, under the setting New Mexico sun, Mary Donovan became Mary Sullivan. There was no big ceremony, just heartfelt wishes and a new beginning. And when Roy Sullivan, the former gunman who had found redemption in the love of a strong-willed Irish woman, kissed his wife for the first time, neither the dark past nor the uncertain future mattered, just the present, imperfect, honest, and ultimately redemptive.